Rock and roll is one of the most iconic styles of music in American history. Where did it come from? All music has its origins. Whether you're a fan of hip-hop, folk, or rock music, there's a story behind that sound. And as a guitar player and rock musician myself, this is a story that I know and love. Rock and roll and its history are important to both American music and American culture as a whole, and today I will be discussing the origins and social impacts of rock and roll, as well as some information on one of the most iconic people. Okay. During the slave trade from Africa, a lot of African culture was brought over to the United States, and even though lots of slave masters would try to westernize their slaves, they were not able to stop them from singing their traditional songs, which ended up becoming known as spirituals. This would often be sung in large groups during or after work. Once freed and given more readily access to musical instruments, they were able to transform the genre of spirituals into the genres of blues and ragtime. The genre of blues is characterized by accentuated bass lines, soulful vocals, and the frequent use of blue notes, that is to say notes in between notes in a musical scale, and usually incorporates quite dark or sad themes. It's also generally focused on one singular performer, this being Robert Johnston, the first recorded blues musician. Ragtime is known primarily for its wacky, almost offbeat, syncopated rhythms, and is generally very piano-centric, though not every ragtime song uses piano. In the early 1900s, ragtime was huge in New Orleans and actually transformed into the first iteration of jazz, Dixieland jazz. However, that would not be the jazz that we all know today. Jazz is characterized by its blend of both blues and ragtime, while also adding in much more improvisation, a key component to the sound and culture of jazz music as a whole. Just as everything evolves and changes, so did jazz, spawning numerous different subgenres over the years, one of the earliest and most significant of which being swing. Swing music, popular in the 1930s to 1940s, had many elements of jazz, but featured shorter, tighter, more structured songs and generally incorporated vocals. Swing music was also the first genre to specifically appeal to the youth, and according to Tim Snelson in his article, "They'll Be Dancing in the Aisles," it identified youth as a differentiated market with their own demands and rituals. Once they realized music could be sold to the youth, the industry became a lot more open to new sounds and ideas, which also opened the door for a lot of different musicians to get their foot in. In 1953, Elvis Presley walked into his local recording studio in Memphis, Tennessee, just to play some songs for fun. He didn't have any expectations of what was going to happen. But the lady in the recording studio was blown away by his performance and showed his recording to her boss, Sam Phillips, who is now known as the man who invented rock. Phillips was not initially impressed by his performance, but decided to call him in anyway to hear him play with guitarist Scotty Moore. Once he heard him play blues, however, he was blown away. He was so blown away, in fact, that they ended up recording a 2-track album with one blues song performed in a country style and one country song performed in a blues style. As William McKean put it in the article, what we talk about when we talk about Elvis, both were performed in a hybrid style that came instinctively from Elvis. He was a product of the poor white subculture in the South, but he loved black music. Elvis's music took the best parts of both black and white music and melded them together into a new genre. This genre would end up becoming known as rock and roll. This is not only significant for the music world. In fact, Elvis and his music had a large impact on integrating blacks and whites over the common love of his music. It wasn't just Elvis doing this either. Alan Freed, host of the Moondog Show radio show and coiner of the term rock and roll, played a variety of both black and white music to a variety of both black and white fans, something that was very rare at the time. Of course, this was not the only effect that this new-founded rock and roll had on culture and society. Rock and roll, as many things are, was criticized by the older generations for being too wild and non-conservative. Parents of teenagers during the 1950s blamed this music for the disobedience and rebellion of their children, and it was also looked down upon for its sexual nature. whether that be its lyrical content or its stage performances, such as Elvis gyrating his hips on television, which sparked massive outrage at the time. The sentiment that seemed to bother rock and roll fans the most, however, was the idea that this was all a phase and that it was going to die. This was staunchly rejected by the youth and even spawned a hit song, Rock and Roll is Here to Stay, by Danny and the Juniors. However, this would not end up being the case, as author Dina Weinstein points out in her book, Rock in America. Although the song declared that rock and roll would never die, at that very moment, rock was experiencing its first brush with mortality. Around this time, many of rock's biggest stars were starting to fade out for different reasons, some scandals, some personal reasons. However, this kind of spelled the end of rock music as a genre. Rock and roll itself did not make it to see the 60s, however, it would continue to live on through its inspiration of rock and all music that has came since. Despite dying as a genre itself rather quickly, the musical and societal effects of it are going to be present for the foreseeable future. Rock and roll was created over years of musical evolution, with influences in jazz, country, R&B, etc. It was a culmination of all the music that had come before it. The origins of rock and roll is not only significant for its historical context, but also as its immense influence on music. All in all, rock and roll is one of the most iconic styles of music of all time, and has helped bring together different sounds and ethnicities, the results of which we can still see today.